The right to reparations is an obligation owed to victims when gross violations of international human rights law occur or serious violations of international humanitarian law by the wrongdoer state. A state is obligated to provide as much as possible justice to those victims. The wrongdoer state is obligated to cease and remedy all consequences of the illegal act, restore as much as possible the situation as it was before the illegal act was committed, and compensate those victims for any injustices occurred that cannot be remedied. In cases of forcible displacement, the right to reparations consists of voluntary physical repatriation or return, property restitution, compensation for any damages, and guarantees of non-repetition. The right to reparations, in all its components, finds its basis in international human rights law, international humanitarian law, the law of nations, international refugee law, and several UN resolutions. Regarding the right of return, the first component of the right to reparations, Israel has consistently denied Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons the exercise of this right. As of today, Israel has forcibly displaced almost 2/3 of the Palestinian people. This is about 8.3 million. Israel continues to perpetuate the displacement of the Palestinian people through the ongoing denial of their return using a number of different laws. The 1950 Israeli law of return grants the right of admission and settlement only to Jews in historic Palestine. The 1952 Israeli citizenship law confers automatic citizenship to Jewish colonizers. The 1954 Prevention of Infiltration law prohibits Palestinians from returning to Palestine. In 2001, the Israeli Knesset passed the entrenchment of the negation of the right to return law, which would prohibit any future agreement that would allow the return of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons. The 2018 nation-state law grants the right of self-determination only to Jews and constitutionalized the superiority of Jews over all others in historic Palestine. The second component of the right to reparations is property restitution. According to the United Nations Pinheiro Principles, all refugees and displaced persons have the right to have restored to them any land, housing, or property they were arbitrarily or unlawfully deprived. The 1950 absentee property law vested all ownership of deserted Palestinian property into an Israeli governmental agency, the custodian of absentee property, including those properties belonging to Palestinians internally displaced inside Israel who also hold Israeli citizenship. The 1950 Development Authority, or Transfer of Property Law, authorized the use of absentee property from the custodian to be used only for Jews or sold only to Jews. The 1953 Land Acquisition Law authorized the custodian to transfer the ownership of Palestinian absentee property for the use of the development for Israeli Jews only. The 1960 Basic Law defines Israeli lands as lands owned by the state or the Jewish National Fund and prohibits their transfer to non-Jews. The third component of the right to reparations is compensation, which is a monetary amount paid for harm or damages inflicted to the victims. It should be complementary to and not a substitute for the other components of reparations. Accordingly, the ICJ advisory opinion on the wall in 2004 stated that in the event that restitution should prove to be materially impossible, Israel has an obligation to compensate the persons in question for damages suffered. The fourth component of reparations is guarantees of non-repetition. which obligates the state in question to cease and desist the internationally wrongful act. To fulfill the obligation of non-repetition, Israel must stop the ongoing displacement of Palestinians, repeal all the aforementioned legislation, withdraw any corresponding military orders, and also enact the appropriate legislation in order to redress the situation and prevent further displacement. When an international wrong is committed and the state in question is unwilling or unable to fulfill its obligations, third-party states are obligated to act. And these obligations of third-party states are particularly relevant in cases of both mass and individual forced displacement. In other words, the forcible displacement of the Palestinian people is a violation of a peremptory norm of international law, a war crime, and a crime against humanity, which thereby activates the obligation of third-party states to act. The obligations of third-party states can be summarized into three components. The first of these obligations is a duty of cooperation to bring an end to the forced displacement. The second is a duty of abstention, which means that states should refrain from recognizing or rendering aid or assistance to those illegal acts. And finally, third-party states have an obligation to hold perpetrators of these illegal acts accountable. In conclusion, the ongoing Nakba is characterized by both the ongoing displacement of the Palestinian people and their systematic and consistent denial of their right to reparations, which is entrenched in Israeli laws, policies, and practices. The denial of reparations, therefore, not only perpetuates the conflict, but also entrenches Israelis' domination and subjugation of the Palestinian people.